The battlefield as we know it is changing from tanks to drones. Everything requires an enormous amount more circuitry in it.
These are players that have a vested interest to make high-tech weapons. You look at BlackRock, they own all the military manufacturing companies, and they're the ones who are controlling SLV with an 81 million share short position. Now, you can naked short an ETF, creating shares out of thin air that in theory aren't backed by anything. That's why BlackRock came out and said, by the way, there is a risk at some point of those shorts not being able to get the silver. If you short, be careful. Well, they're the ones who are controlling SLV. So if you short SLV, it drives down the paper price. They're the ones who would arguably, if you're thinking military industrial complex, needing lots of silver to make high-tech weapons.
Welcome, everyone. Important discussion today. I have Andy Schectman with me, Miles Franklin, Precious Metals CEO. We've talked before about the Arctic routes and the domination of the BRICS nations controlling the Arctic Ocean and those trade routes. But today I wanted to get his thoughts, and Andy, thank you for joining me, about the paper market, the silver that seems to be in quite short supply around the world. And if these paper markets were to break, non-deliveries. Now that's one thing with the precious metals, but this Humpty Dumpty moment might reverberate through every other paper market across these largely traded commodities, such as our grain crops, the soy, the wheat, the corn. And then how would that escalate in real price discovery, but without all the subsidies for all the biofuels and the farm inputs and all these, there's a tremendous amount of subsidies from our government just to grow corn. So if the paper market were to break in silver, then how would that reverberate across the rest of all the paper markets on all the commodities that are traded? Because when I say Humpty Dumpty moment, I do not really underplay that. Once it breaks, and Andy, I was going to ask you, do you think it would ever come back, and do you think there would be confidence in there? And I guess that's where I'd like to start the conversation today.
Well, yeah, man, and it's good to be here, David. Thanks for having me. You're talking some of the biggest banks in the world that are not just bullion banks, that are playing this game of massive rehypothecation, 400 contracts to 1 ounce of gold or silver. In London, maybe 170 million ounce float, trading 600 million ounces of deliverable contracts per day, up to 2 billion ounces standing that are already out there that could potentially stand for delivery. I mean, what could possibly go wrong? And if one of these banks did fail, it's not isolated to the metals market. These banks are involved in all markets, from Forex to equities to, interest rates, you name it. The contagion, the systemic contagion is extraordinary. And you're right, it would have a big deal and a big impact. And furthermore, it's interesting, the guy who, I don't know his name, but there's a gentleman who's leading the development of the BRICS grain exchange, which is a reality right now. And about a year ago, he made a comment that caught my attention, more so because of the implications on the way the West has played the metals markets and all of the commodities. Roughly 1,000 commodities traded on COMEX, and you'll find that silver is always the number one largest concentrated short position. A handful, 8 Western banks hold it. Gold's right there, platinum and palladium right there. But the guy that's in charge of the grain exchange was being interviewed, and he said, we produce and we consume more grain here in the global South than they do in the West, and yet we have no control of the prices. That's controlled on COMEX, he said, but with the development of the grain exchange, that will change.
This is not a toothpaste. It's a revolution for your teeth. Remineralize, strengthen teeth, all natural ingredients, essential oils, minerals, salts. Alfa Vedic Dental Solutions System. That's alphavedic.com/civilization. So take a look at what they have. alphavedic.com/civilization. Every purchase you make helps keep our live radio show and podcast on air, bringing you more information just like this. alphavedic.com/civilization. That link is in the show notes below.
And so what you have is an understanding that commodities have been controlled in a casino-style, speculative, Western-based prerogative manner for a long time. And the players around the globe, to me, understand that. And that's one of the reasons that they've been using the West's hubris against them, whether it be standing for delivery on commodities or positioning themselves in the grain market, the food markets, the soft commodities, or the Chinese buying the London Metals Exchange, or the Chinese endeavor in the Belt Road Initiative, which is 150 plus countries, largely resource rich and underdeveloped, or all of the BRICS partners are not only resource rich, but integral to trade routes on sea, on land. I think the bottom line is that to the rest of the world that is in some ways slowly challenging the hegemony of the West, it is all about commodities. And if you were to see one of these Western behemoth bullion banks default failure to deliver on the LBMA or anywhere for that matter, the repercussions are severe. It's interesting because we did see more or less a default in the nickel market, and they rewrote the rules, so to speak, kind of like they did to the Hunt brothers. This is a high stakes battle that they're going to try and keep it going as long as they can. But as long as they keep it going, it plays into the hands of the BRICS nations, of the countries amongst the global East and South, the Asiatic countries, who are using the West's, I believe, fleeting time of controlling commodity prices to establish deals, trade deals in local currencies, and to accumulate future deposits and whatever isn't nailed down. So yeah, it's a big deal, not just silver collapsing, but the contagion and how fast it would systemically spread throughout the ecosystem. It's a good question and a very big deal, and one that you could sit and let your mind go really wander for a long time and probably over a bottle of scotch and play that one out and see where it ends up.
Well, it ended up right over in Kazakhstan being the final linchpin to connect those oil pipelines from Iran all the way directly over to China, with the quadruple rail lines running along that for a predominant, kilometer amount of that before it spurs off and then heads up to Europe. Like, that is where that will end up. There's so much focus on the stifling of the ability for these nations to trade amongst each other, but then also, you mentioned these bullion banks taking out a full year of silver supply out on, just a week or two of trading. And that's something that's unthinkable. But really, who benefits from that? So you got the big four that are, pushing the metals and suppressing the price. And, today, just before the show, I checked it. Silver had dropped to $46.73. Gold came down to $39.39, but it's bouncing back up on another candle as we have the show here. But who benefits from that? Okay, so these bullion banks are working together in conjunction to drive prices down on using these short contracts. But there is a level above them with the hand on the puppet strings. So who is that's really driving these banks to then try to smash the price down? Because I don't believe it's going to really last that much longer. But just from what I've seen, I wanted to talk to you about Aruba and see if anybody was, talking silver down there, if you got a chance to get into the shops or anything to see what the prices were comparatively. But these four bullion banks that are out there that are smashing the price down, who is above them that's controlling them, giving them the orders to then drive the price down? Who benefits the most, as I should say?
I mean, the easy answer would be central banks. Is there coordination here in the West? I don't know. We've become a massive importer of gold. There are so many crumbs out there pointing to gold being reintegrated into the monetary system. Could it be the Treasury Department through the Exchange Stabilization Fund? I don't know. Could it be the realization that the folks in the BRICS nations have been doing this for a very long time? And if we didn't get our act together, then what? It was interesting. It's been a several-day pull down, but one of the things that we've seen, according to Michael Lynch, and he does a great job of analyzing the COMEX, is some big buyers, as they drove the paper price down, Let me see if I can give you some actual numbers here. Broke my glasses this morning, so this ought to be fun. But some actual numbers that I think will explain exactly what I'm talking about. But in any case, the big buyers that have come in have been Bank of America and Morgan Stanley. And what's interesting is that you have Morgan Stanley that has publicly, their chief investment officer has come out and said the 60-40 mentality, or excuse me, the 60-40 plan that has always been in place for Wall Street, 60 stock, 40 bonds, should now be 60-20-20. Their chief investment officer is telling you to sell half your bonds and buy gold. Now, they've been a big seller on COMEX for a while. They've bought, I don't know, 700,000 ounces in October, it looks like. And the other one was Bank of America. Their chief analyst, Michael Hartnett, who has a massively expensive newsletter, has said, no, it should be 25, 25, 25, 25, deviating from the 60-40 rule. Keeping in mind, these banks never recommended gold to their people, 5% at the most. And he's saying 25 stock, bond, short-term treasury, and 25% gold. So they're the big buyers as the price was driven down. What's interesting is that we've seen already almost 39 million ounces of silver delivered to COMEX here in the month of October. It'll be one of the biggest ones ever. And what's really interesting about it is that both gold and silver experience massive mid-delivery month deliveries, issuance. So what I mean by that is that most people who stand for delivery make the intention known on day one of the delivery period, like October 1st. But what we saw in silver, the deliveries are up 193% from the first day notice number. This showing a rush for physical metal as they drive the paper price down using the December contract and then come in and buy October immediate delivery contracts late in the cycle, which makes it tough to analyze because, most people are looking at the open interest and then try and discern who's going to stand for delivery on day one. Well, these guys come in, knock the paper price down, and come in the middle of the delivery period and buy a contract for immediate delivery. Same thing is true with gold, up 93% from first day notices. And it's a big deal because, you've had 6,000 between October 17th and 19th, I believe the 3 days, over 6,000 contracts were written for immediate physical delivery. Each of those were daily records for this point or that point in the delivery period. And so, you're looking at a situation where entities, to cover shorts, are driving paper prices down to buy immediate delivery contracts for the current month. All of this is happening, and one could argue is collusive, is in I'm sure, violation of several laws that the CFTC should be policing, yet, of course, they're on vacation right now as government is shut down. And it certainly has the footprints of big banks, not only covering shorts, but also big players that are being squeezed out of positions, covering, taking profit. A lot of the things that the public or that the mainstream media would have espoused are valid and true. It was extended, had gone up for 9 straight weeks. It was overbought. But when you see, as an example, last week, a market where after New York had closed and on its way to Asia, there's virtually no liquidity. The traders in New York are done for the day. The traders in Asia are not at their desks. And someone comes and pours billions of dollars of gold and silver on the market. Now, that would guarantee you the least beneficial settlement you could ever possibly get. It would just trigger sell stops all the way down, and you'd get algorithms that would sell as these levels are being violated. There's no one there to catch the bid because there's no liquidity in the market. It would guarantee the worst possible settlement. It was done for effect, and that's when Bank of America and Morgan Stanley came in and bought massive amounts of physical and pushed the price back up like you saw here today. Price goes down and then comes right back up. It reeks of short covering by large players who have too big of a position, these 4 or 8 Western banks, where the rise spike in gold that we saw in silver was creating borderline existential threat to some of these players, and this is the reaction that we should see. I think that's the point, is that the mainstream media talks about the reasons, which many of which are valid, but they neglect to notice that part of the way this is done is by drive-by shootings in the most illiquid period of time, where any trader who would have done that, David, would be fired and shot, and most likely not in that order, if it were done for real benefit, and it just isn't. So I don't know. The trend hasn't changed. Really, the trend will not change until central banks stop buying gold, and they're not doing that. And this is just a breather. You also have the October sell season, where it's the end of the fiscal calendar. You got hedge funds need to balance their books and book their losses or their gains. You have November being the buy season, where now they come in with fresh capital and getting ready to redeploy it. So there's a lot at play here. But in the end, who benefits? The ones that were able to drive the price down and cover stale shorts, that in an environment where we see a lot of standing for delivery, which is an environment that makes having rehypothecated positions very dangerous.
So there's actual real physical need inside some industries here. Like, who are these players inside the real industries that would need silver for manufacturing of their products, that are going to have that, consistent need running across, that aren't playing the market so much, but that's, increasing a certain percentage per year over time. And you can kind of take that out on a linear trend there. So like, how are they fitting in the entire mix? Because they're dependent on having that silver supply.
Well, we've seen literally billions upon billions upon billions upon billions of dollars of metal delivered to COMEX this year. And we don't know who it is. I mean, could it be Tesla? Could it be Sony or Samsung or Major? And the same thing is true, massive deliveries out of the LBMA. Who's taking it? Are they the photovoltaic crowd, those making solar panels in China? We see a lot of silver coming out of the Shanghai Exchange. Are the industrials, I think is what you're saying, realizing that we are setting up for a battle between the industrials, those who need it to make products, and or the hedge funds and the traders, who see that this is a game that is largely, oversold or under-owned and over rehypothecated, meaning that there are far more paper contracts than bars standing behind for delivery, and the trend is for delivery, and they smell opportunity against the naked short positions. Or how about the military industrial complex, who needs silver to make high-tech weapons? And really, that to me is why the why, David, is what really matters. Why would 8 Western banks have been holding the largest concentrated short position in any of the 1,000 commodities traded on COMEX for years? It's because the military industrial complex, aka BlackRock, who just happens to be, along with JP Morgan, who paid a $920 million fine to the Justice Department for manipulating the metals market, the largest fine at that point the Justice Department ever handed out. They're the primary custodians of the largest silver trust in the world, SLV, and primary of GLD, along with HSBC Bank, who's right there. Excuse me, not HS. Yeah, I believe it is HSBC, has a little piece of it. Again, HSBC is right there as well as one of the big short positions that we see in the West. But these are players that have a vested interest to make high-tech weapons. You look at BlackRock; they own all the military manufacturing companies, and they're the ones who are controlling SLV with an 81 million share short position. Now, you can naked short an ETF, creating shares out of thin air that in theory aren't backed by anything. That's why BlackRock came out and said, by the way, there is a risk at some point of those shorts not being able to get the silver. If you short, be careful. Well, they're the ones who are controlling SLV. So if you short SLV, it drives down the paper price. They're the ones who would arguably, if you're thinking military industrial complex, needing lots of silver to make high-tech weapons and F-35s and all that kind of stuff and sell them all around the world, they're also the ones that get the reconstruction contracts when those weapons are used around the world in places like the Ukraine. So it's been in the West's prerogative, not just the United States, but all of the Western countries who, through a strong military, have ruled the world for a very long time, it has been in their best interest to maintain an environment of suppressed silver prices through these exchanges. The thing is that these exchanges offer the ability to stand for delivery. And the countries in the global south and east, the Chinas, the Saudis, the Russias, the Indias, all of the countries that are uniting have become coordinated in many ways, have become motivated in others, sophisticated, wealthy. They weren't when this game began. And so they're standing for delivery. This is creating that imbalance, that potential problem that some of these banks would have. It's beating us at our own game over time. The part that a lot of people who would listen to this and are bright and well read would say, well, why wouldn't they just come in and buy it all? Well, if you do that, you cut off your nose to spite your face. You know, it's just an environment where it's kind of like the nanny who could steal everything and leave and never come back, or every day take a piece of jewelry and every day take something else. And you wonder, where's all my stuff going? Couldn't possibly be the nanny, could it? They're doing it over time, slowly, to bleed down all of the availability that is there. They want to siphon as much of all of the world's commodities as possible using the delivery mechanisms. And I think the West understands that now. And this is one of these deals where they're fighting back, I think, to kind of keep things from getting a little bit more noticed by the world than they would like in terms of price appreciation.
A point on that before the next question. The battlefield as we know it is changing from tanks to drones, whether it be handheld drones, surveillance drones, Reaper drones, missiles. Everything requires an enormous amount more circuitry in it versus the tanks. We're going away from that. What you see, the most sophisticated tanks, and that's old. That needs to be destroyed in a war somewhere so then we can rebuild everything. The entire new genre of warfare is all drone-based and circuitry-based, of things that can move autonomously, all connected by AI, in addition to the data centers that need to be built out, in addition to new power systems that need to come on the line. Just everything's going to be needing an enormous amount more metals moving forward for this new genre of warfare that's evolving out of. Like, this thing is finished. These old, like, slow battleships moving across the oceans. The only you're going to need is like a C-130 to drop out 10,000 drones over an area. Your national navy, and you're not going to need what we consider the traditional. It projects a little bit of power, right? But in the future, everything's going to be autonomous warfare, and the amount of metals and silver and gold for that sort of production is going to be outrageous. So, to your question again, as you were talking about with the grains in the beginning, China has no way for price discovery except relying on dust for it. So, at what point does China wrest control of the silver market from the West, because they have so much of that then they can control pricing and have dual pricing across? We got London, you got the COMEX, physical delivery, you got the futures over in Chicago. But then London plays in there. But what happens when you say Shanghai comes on and actually is the #1 dominant price setter for the world? At what point does that happen in the future, Dink?
Well, Shanghai right now is developing multi-jurisdictional vaults all around. Well, their intention is to do it all throughout the Belt Road. The intention is to internationalize the yuan. In my mind, what they're doing is building the rails for the BRICS. So it's through the cross interbank payment system, the SIPs. They've just, well, let me answer that in a little bit roundabout way. The SIPs is a system that settles instantly, much faster anyways, than SWIFT. They've connected the Asian nations and 5 Middle Eastern nations already, and Brazil is now joining in as well. And it's a cross-payment system like SWIFT that the SWIFT is not compatible with. The Asian nations alone represent twice the population of the United States, about 800 million. It's China's largest trading partner by far, 35% of global GDP. That doesn't even take into account the 5 Middle Eastern nations and Brazil that just set up deals to trade soybeans for digital yuan. Now, the interesting thing is China just made that yuan convertible into gold on the Shanghai Gold Exchange without converting to dollars first. Well, in order to get metal out of China, it has to go through Hong Kong. Guess where the first vault was built? The Shanghai expansion, Hong Kong. Guess where vault number 2 is under construction right now? Saudi Arabia. And they have intentions then to internationalize it in various jurisdictions and countries so that anyone that will trade with China, like Russia, 90+% of all of their trades between the two have been in local currencies. So, Russia will sell it natural gas or oil to China, receive yuan. They may not want it. They can immediately, just like that, convert it into gold on one of the exchanges. So what is happening is that through the internationalization of the yuan and the multi-jurisdictional idea that China has, where, you look at Venezuela's gold held by the Bank of England. Can we have it back, please? No.
Never.
So that doesn't work so well. So what they're doing is, instead of having one jurisdiction, they're going to have it spread throughout. And then you have the BRICS that enter in, and you have the Moscow exchange and the St. Petersburg exchange and the new exchange in Singapore and, the United Arab Emirates exchange. And all of these exchanges will all be connected through payment rails that allow imbalances in trade and in currency to be settled in gold. And I think this is the part, again, where instant gratification for analysts and people just, looking, it's not fast enough. Well, they're wondering, well, why not just wrestle it away now? Because they're using the hubris, the idiocy of the West and their suppression of the price, because they control it right now on COMEX, to drain the shelves. Once enough of it has been drained at some point, because largely the Chinese system, the system over there, is cash and carry. You pay, you get, you leave. It's not a forward selling system. There is a futures exchange, but it's not the same like we see here in the US, where prices are controlled through commercial banks who have unlimited bank purses to create perceptions and illusions in reality. This will go badly. It will end badly, as all manipulations do. But I think they're building an infrastructure where the countries involved will have probably greater say on what the prices truly are. Not yet, but it would appear. And at the same time, you have Citibank and I think it may be Bank of, who was it? I think it's Citi, and there's one other. I forgot. I should have really read the story. There are two other big Morgan Stanley and Citi, I believe, are trying to open up, challenge JP Morgan for bank supremacy in London. So the West won't give up easily on this. They want to open up in vaults in London too. But I think there's a realization right now that, as Trump said on Easter Sunday, the golden art of negotiating. He who has the gold makes the rules. It's not just gold. It's silver. It's soft commodities like you've mentioned. The Chinese bought the LME a few years ago, the London Metals Exchange. Those are all the base metals. They understand that this is about having physical commodities more than it is having debt instruments by a government that is broken, insolvent, shut down at the moment, 200 trillion in debt. And flies around the world, imposing sanctions. And yet by 2031, 100% of tax revenue will go just to pay the mandatory entitlements, according to the Congressional Budget Office, including things like Medicare and Medicaid and interest on the debt, meaning that our defense, our military, which is discretional, will have to borrow it from our foes, hopefully, to fund our military to police the world. And that's why you see things like the Genius Act coming on board to create synthetic demand for the Treasury. And this is a very interesting time, man. I would argue we've entered a new monetary system right now, and things are going to start to rapidly change across the globe in response to it, and here at home as things continue to unfold, this new fabric, this new infrastructure, which is being laid down right now.
Yeah, I would agree with you. I'm, looking around, and the landscape does seem that we've already rolled over into the new system, but they just haven't notified everybody yet.
Right.
So, Astana over in Kazakhstan, any thoughts on that? Because that seems to be one of the new metals banking, energy trading centers that's evolving. That's between in the Belt and Road as that sort of center point, always has been. Go back to the traditional Silk Road overland north route, and it comes through there. The southern route joined from there as well. Coming up from Myanmar and then eventually through India and reconnected up in there. So when you're looking at that through time of 4,000 years, that was a very integral central point of trade across the Silk Road nations at that time, Silk Road trading nations. So what's your feeling on Kazakhstan being like a center point for, again, some of these repositories, hubs, trading centers?
It'll be there for sure. It's also part of the Eurasian Economic Union. I haven't checked. I believe they have either applied formally. Well, let's just check. I mean, I think, no, I won't check. I'm fairly certain they have applied or have expressed direct interest in joining the BRICS. I can tell you that the president of Belarus had come out and said that both the Shanghai Cooperation Organization and the Eurasian Economic Union need to be folded into the BRICS, that they're largely part of the same goal. They're all together. And, I think have very similar goals and are aligning in many ways. So all of these will be connected through a form of cooperation, I think. And that's really the most important thing. Cooperation in building a vibrant ecosystem, in trading in local currencies, in settling imbalances in gold, in building out the infrastructure that the West has controlled for a very long time. So, I mean, I'm not as familiar with it the way you are, being on the other side of the world, but I will simply tell you that as far as I'm concerned, the Eurasian Economic Union in many ways shares the same goals that the BRICS do. And it's interesting, if you look at the payment rails that are being rolled out right now, whether it be the bridge technology, mBridge, or whether it be the bridge pay for B2B, which is BRICS Pay, they're all being rolled out now through the Belt Road Initiative as well, and through all of these countries that once were the Silk Road, so that they will have the ability, and through SIPs, to make all of these trades outside the dollar, outside the SWIFT, which kills the settlement of the dollar, and put reserves into things like gold, which is what they have already agreed upon to use to settle imbalances, which chips away at the reserve status of the dollar. While I can't specifically answer what that will play from a standpoint of geographics, from a big picture, I would say they are very, very closely aligned with not only the BRICS, but also the Shanghai Cooperation Organization and this entire expansion that is going on through that region right now.
Yeah, one last question for you here. Thank you so much for your time. For the Bank for International Settlements here, in conjunction with the Bank of England, they have the new PDF out called Project PIX Trial, and that's monitoring and backing of stable coins. And it goes through, talks about how they're going to classify different wallets through credit monitoring and social credit scoring, at least on the Chinese model. And if one wallet or second wallet will be able to interact with another wallet, or what kind of stipulations will be associated with wallets, and if they're going to even be able to complete transactions with different wallets. And I'll spell that for you for anybody who wants to look at this. It is called PYXTRIAL, and that's from the Bank for International Settlements with Bank of England, Project PIX Trial. And it's out for a couple months now, but it just goes through the frameworks of what you were talking about with the stablecoin issuance across how most central banks are going to be operating in this, in addition to our U.S. native stablecoin Genius Act issuance. But whatever the rest of the world central banks are going to come out with their CBDCs, how all this integrates and who's going to be allowed to operate, who's not. And it even goes down to the most basic premise of it was stablecoins. So you have $1, so I have $1, you have $1. Are you and I going to be able to transfer our dollar to each other? Like Andy, I owe you $1. I want to send it to you. It should be a 1-to-1 equivalent, minus a small transaction fee of probably 1/100th of a percent or 1/1000th of 1%. But the stipulations of, shall your wallet even be active enough to be able to receive or send transactions based on your behavior patterns, what this thing goes into. And it's pretty interesting that the BIS is already on this.
Yep.
Comments on that?
Yeah, that is the foray into the digital surveillance state. Not only that, the stablecoins backed by U.S. Treasuries which gives synthetic demand for the U.S. Treasury market as organic demand is fleeting. And companies like USA Tether, whose new CEO is Bo Hines, who was the crypto czar for Trump until August, take the proceeds and buy gold and Bitcoin. That's what they seem to be buying right now. Maybe Bitcoin to pay down the debt and gold to continue to devalue the dollar. You're right. They are all embedded with AML, anti-money laundering, KYC, know your client, and KYT, know your transaction technology. They will control the on-ramp and the off-ramp. And you're right. It isn't a stable coin, but it is a stable coin in or it is a it isn't a CBDC, it is a CBDC in stablecoin clothing. In essence, they have the ability to, as you say, to control or prohibit or inhibit your ability to access the stablecoins. When you look at your bank statement, it will look the same as it always has. It will just transfer much more swiftly, no pun intended, like Venmo or Zelle, instant settlement from one party to the next. But what it does is it provides a tremendous boost and synthetic demand for the U.S. Treasury market, as every stable coin that will be backed by the dollar is backing the dollar has to be backed by, in essence, U.S. Treasuries. And then that is where you start to get into interesting conversations. But to your point, it does, in my mind, open the door to the surveillance state, the digital surveillance state. Absolutely. And I would think most countries want to lock us in this digital financial prison. That's part of the game. And at the same time, they're siphoning out all the gold and silver they can get by standing for delivery across the globe, but not too fast to wake up the masses. And so, yeah, I think you're onto something there for sure. It is something we are moving towards, a completely digital form of money, whether it be CBDC or stablecoin. In fact, the ramifications are largely the same.
And between then and now, we're going to have to go through the hyperinflationary event, the complete reset, where everybody understands it is reset. And where does that take food pricing for the average person? Because we've seen through history, the thing that routinely destabilizes and dissolves nations, or at least the structure of that, whatever construct it is of a nation being led, or how it works at the very base foundation, gets ripped to shreds when hungry masses come through, storming the castles, for a better term. When this happens, food prices are going to go astronomically expensive. And that's the reason I was asking in the beginning, with the paper contracts and real price discovery, are we going to just repeat another cycle? It's all about the food.
I don't think any of us want to see. And you can go down that rabbit hole. Bill Gates owns all the farmland. And it does bring in universal basic income. There are a lot of rabbit holes you can go down, but there's a fine line between conspiracy and reality. And I think you're right. And when it all boils down to it, what is the most important thing? Food and water. And what happens when people stop receiving their entitlements, their welfare, their food stamps? It's something. Gerald Celente has a statement. He says, when people lose everything, they lose it. Meaning, not something you want to see. I think it's the antithesis of being locked in your home, where the others are out in the streets and doing whatever they can to feed their hungry children, and that's a scary thought altogether.
It is, but a perfect case for owning metals as the fiat prices run away. Those pieces of metal in the hand continue to hold their value. It's just the paper fluctuates with that same coin is in your bar, coin in your hand. Andy Schectman, Miles Franklin, Precious Metals CEO. Thank you so much for your time. I'll link that in the description box below, milesfranklin.com. Check out the offerings. I was in there earlier looking around at the different bars. And
who want really good pricing, send us an email at info@milesfranklin.com and say you want our price list. We keep close to the vest. Let us know you saw us on this podcast. We'll send it out to you. It's really only for folks in North America, unfortunately. with insurance these days, getting metal outside the country is really tough, but or at least outside of Canada and the U.S. But David, it's good to see you, brother. I wish you all the best, and I look forward to doing this with you again anytime. I'd love to come back on.
Thank you so much. And everybody, take what you will out of the conversation and use it to enhance your lives and those around you. We'll see you next time. Bye for now.